Well, welcome everybody. It's good to see you today. I didn't know whether to wear shorts or jeans or long sleeve shirt or what. I wore kind of what I was wearing snook fishing last night. Um, it's good to be here. I love Busy Bee. I love Dan and Tina. It's a wonderful place to be. Get it? It's some people got that. I've always enjoyed this setting. And we used to have these talks in another small area over there, but it's so nice under here under the trees, and we have a little bit of a breeze. Not many bugs, which is good, but I'm glad you all guys can come out. My name is Scott Walker. I've lived in Florida my whole life, all 57 years. Sunday, actually, 57 years. Thank you. But I grew up in South Florida, a little further south of here, Palm Beach County, where I, as a child, subsisted on whatever I could scrounge around the neighborhood in the trees. Carambola, tamarind, mango, all the citrus I could ever find, key limes, all those things. I was always interested in fruit because that's what we all had as kids. The real nasty Suriname cherries we used to throw at each other, and those things. So some of you are nodding your heads, you know what I'm talking about. How many people here today are from Florida? Originally, a few, okay. And how many people here have moved from somewhere else? Quite a few, yeah. And welcome. It's and more probably some more recently, but it's Florida is a wonderful place. We are right in a subtropical zone, so there are certain things that we can grow here comfortably and well. There are some things that we have to baby and pamper a little bit and protect. But I'm of the thought life that. I just want to put in whatever I can and maybe push the boundaries a little bit. And so, but what I'd like to do today, just to give you an overview, I want to just talk about what I'm going to talk about. Three of the most common and well-growing fruits here in Florida. Three in this area, actually. Three uncommon, maybe fruits you're just not familiar with. And then I want to talk about pruning of tropical fruit trees. And then I want to talk about protection because we're coming into the winter time. It's been a long time since we've had a hard freeze that has taken all of our fruits back or down or killed them. But I do want to give you some things to know and do that could protect your babies, so to speak, So let's just go ahead and begin with the first couple things. The first one, obviously, the king of fruits, the mango. How many people like mango? Most people. And for those who didn't raise their hand, you've probably never had a good mango. If you've had mangoes from the store, they were probably stringy or they didn't ripen on time or they just got jelly rot inside and they just weren't good. Store-bought mangoes these days still, unless you get a good Kent, store-bought mangoes are typically the worst, in my opinion. They're tart, they ripen poorly, they're stringy. The mangoes now, the varieties that we have, there are literally hundreds of varieties, especially in recent years, that Gary Zill and a couple of guys have sort of cultivated and created mangoes that slice like butter, no fiber whatsoever, and they have these phenomenal flavor profiles. And that's all with the breeding of these different types, cross-pollinating of mangoes. So you have mangoes that literally taste like coconut. Mangoes, some of my favorite from the recent years are ones that come from they're Southeast Asian, but they come from a more citrus line. And so there's mangoes that literally taste like orange sherbet. And so ones like lemon meringue is a good one, lemon zest, orange sherbet, really phenomenal mango. So I say all that to say, if you've never tried a really good mango, it might turn you towards mango. Mangoes are fairly easy to grow in this area. I know behind me I have a lot of product. I do love the citrus tone when they're first getting started, but I haven't fertilized in probably 25 years any of my trees. And so I say that to say they're fairly simple to grow. If someone like me can grow mangoes and I have 17 varieties in my yard, then it's easy to say that with a little mulch and a little care, mangoes are a wonderful fruit tree to grow. And they don't all need to be giant trees like this, how they used to be. This oak here, this live oak, is the size trees that I grew up with were. The Haydens and the big ones, climbing up them, eating the stringy mangoes. But anymore, there are a lot of the mangoes are more dwarf stock varieties where they'll like a Namdok Mai. I don't know if there's one here, but I know there's some Namdok Mai mangoes out there. Highly recommended. Have a nice peach flavor to them. But they really, in their out years, without any pruning, I have one that's been in the ground probably 20 years, and it's no more than 15 feet tall. And it just naturally does that. So a lot of mangoes can self-maintain at a certain height. However, when we get to the pruning part, with any tropical fruit tree, I want to make sure you understand that you can manage these trees, and you should manage them, because there's a lot of benefits to managing these trees. So mango, fantastic variety, fairly easy to grow, a little cold sensitive, but I'm talking down below 30 degrees is when you get the damage, and we'll talk about protecting trees a little bit later on. So mango, I would highly recommend mangoes, and there's some wonderful varieties. I just looked at them before I got here. Glen is one of my absolute favorites. It's an old school mango. Glen is got they're disease resistant, they're easy to manage, and everybody seems to love a Glen mango. It's your quintessential classic mango. So that's a great mango to grow. And then when you want to branch out, if you want to try some other things, here's what I'd recommend. If you want to have more than one mango in your yard, look at the season, look at when they bear. Because if you buy a Pickering mango or Rosa-Gold mango, they'll produce as early as May. And yet a kit mango produces as late as Thanksgiving. So you can really spread out your varieties. Even with 3 varieties of mango, you could have mangoes from May, theoretically, all the way through the summer into even August and September, even as late as November. So that's something to consider. When you look at avocado varieties and mango varieties, look at when they actually produce. Because if you just get all your mangoes that produce right in June, then you're kind of done. You have to rely on freezing. But if you get mangoes that spread out their season, as well as avocados, you have a longer season of bearing for your fruits. And that's really something to consider. So mangoes, phenomenal variety. And as I talk, if you have any specific questions on what we're specifically talking about at the moment, feel free to raise your hand, and I'll repeat the question so the camera can hear it and everyone else can hear it. But feel free to ask questions. But so when we're talking about mangoes, phenomenal. And I also want to say I'll be here after the lecture, and I'll stand and answer as many personal questions as you have, not personal questions, but questions, I do that too, but questions relating to fruit. And so I love to just answer anything I can, because I might not hit something, or I might breeze over, and you might, I wish you would have hit that. I'll be here for that. Second thing, obviously, avocado. Now, it is a fruit, but it's actually so much more than a fruit. It's a fuel. There's some good, wonderful, oily mangoes. A lot of, I'll go to the store, I'll go to Publix or Walmart or somewhere and get a Florida avocado, and it tastes like it's been injected with water. It's not the best. And they're large, and then you're stuck with a giant, horrible tasting avocado. But there are some avocados here in Florida. One more recently called the Super Hass, or Super Florida Hass, because someone was asking me earlier about Hass. Can we grow Hass mangoes? Yes, you can, but there are varieties of Hass that are better for Florida. So there are some, but there's 3 standards that I love to recommend because of where we are. I can't recommend a Simmons or a Day. Those are South Florida. If we've dropped down to 30 degrees or 29 degrees, which could happen. It's been a while, but it certainly did in the years in the past. Choquette, and I think it might even be on that sheet, I'm not sure, but a Choquette mango, Choquette. Lula, that's easy to remember. Lula, Monroe, that's a good one. But those are all really good. So Choquette, Lula, Monroe, great avocado varieties that, number one, have a good oil content, they taste good, and they actually can take a little bit of cold, sometimes into the 20s. So just consider those. And again, I'll be here to talk to you about specifics later if I didn't cover what you want. But avocados are great. Now, here's one thing you need to remember about the avocado killer are wet yards and wet property where the sprinkler's going all the time. Avocados like to be high and dry. And that's one of the most common problems, even in my yard that I had one area where I had a Lula, which is a fantastic one. Unfortunately, the little weevils came in that took out the red bays that were all up and down the coast of Florida probably 15 years ago, and that knocked that way back. But I've tried avocados in other areas of my yard, and I'm a little low in my yards, and they just did not do well. So avocados do well up around the fill of the house or in a high area where you never see any pooling water after a strong storm. And that's one of the good indicators. If we get some heavy rains like we had a few months ago, look where the water is. And if you see standing water there, avocados would not typically do well. Mangoes can take it a little bit, but avocados need to be high and dry, good sandy soil. So that's some of the varieties of avocado that I think that I'd recommend, because you can go. What's that? Yes. Wonderful. Yeah, on the beach side. Salt air can sometimes be a problem. Yeah, it's a good question. I'd have to look and see on that, but that's a good question. I can talk to you after about that. But she asked basically, beachside, a lot of the troubles, even if you have nice soil and high and dry, beachside salt tolerance is a big thing to consider. Did you have a question about that? Yeah. I wish I had my document. Avocados were recent sometimes during the winter months and the fall months, but there are some that even go all the way through the whole year. So, but I would say the majority are going to be fall. Is that about right? What is your experience? Any of you growing avocados right now? Yeah, typically fall, winterish. Yeah, that's about the right time. There are some anomaly types that can grow and come into production later in the spring. But again, there's a really good book. Let me just mention this book. I didn't write it. I don't know the guy, but I think it's called Florida's Best Fruiting Trees or Fruiting Plants or something, Florida's Best. And it's written by a guy named Charles Boning, Boning. I would highly recommend that book. And I've got a library of books from is it on there? Oh, good. It's on the back of this it's on the back of this handout here. Yeah, so the original, if any of you have this handout, on the back, some of the recommended books. Florida Fruits, it's a classic. It's been around since the 50s and 60s. A little small, teeny book. Fruits of Warm Climates, good luck finding one of those. They're highly sought after. Florida's Best Fruiting Plants by Charles Boning. Fantastic book. And I say that because in that, it talks about salt tolerance of all the fruiting trees. And then it also gives a very explicit detail, and you can buy the book on Amazon. Maybe the local bookstore might be able to get it for you. But that's a wonderful book, and it's based on all my knowledge and what I've learned over the years. It's so concise, and it hits everything that I need. So avocados, wonderful. You'll make sure you get one that's got a good oil content, but also with our area being subtropical, we're prone to freezing, but they tend to do a little bit better when it comes to cold weather. So the third one of the more common things that I recommend growing are star fruits or carambola. I love carambola. I love star fruit. It's a wonderful. You can chop it up and put it on a salad. You can eat it just fresh. You can take it and juice it, and they produce a ton. I've got so many star fruit in my tree right now. They're just dropping. The squirrels are getting it, and the possums are getting it. Star fruit is always going to be there for you, and the other good thing about it is that it grows in shade. I could put a star fruit tree right here underneath this oak tree, and it will fruit and flower under shade. And that's huge. In fact, down in Palm Beach or South Florida, they tend to grow them under shade cloth. And so carambola or star fruit, I don't know they even have a picture of one, but it's a fruit that it's sort of elongated, but if you were to look at it head on, it's shaped like a star. And if you slice it up, they look like little star shapes. And I typically like to trim off the very outside little strip about about an eighth of an inch off. That's where the oxalic acids can accumulate. Now, I used to eat them as a kid, but if anybody has any problems with kidney issues or anything, you want to trim those off the outside. I'm not scaring you by this, and in fact, you can probably eat them and not worry about it when they're fully ripe, but sometimes people don't know when to pick them. But star fruit is a wonderful fruit. You can put it as a garnish. You can just eat them fresh. Again, juice them. There's some really good varieties over there. I did see 2 or 3 of the Sri Kembagan. It's 2 words, SRI, and Kembagan. That's one of the absolute best varieties. It has the 3 things I love. It's a perfect balance of tart and sweet. It's got a floral aromatic taste, and it's not mushy. It's nice and firm and crunchy. And that's a wonderful when it comes to star fruit. So star fruit is a wonderful thing to grow. That's one of the more common things. And it will grow in shade, and the tree
It's a star fruit right here, is gorgeous. And the blooms are pretty. See these little blooms? Look at all these little star fruit on here. So what you can see is the way I've let my star fruit grow is you can let them grow up and then umbrella. There we go. Thank you. Appreciate that, Paul. This is a star fruit. And they'll typically get, the street chemagons get about this long. Take and you trim off the little edges of this, and then you just slice them up like this, and then you can eat them fresh. You can put them on a salad. You can do anything with them. Some varieties are a little more tart. The ones I grew up with, and you used to have to put sugar on them. But the Sri Chemagon and the Kerry are both very good varieties. Arkin's a little tart, and I think I saw all those over there. But great fruit to grow, especially if you want to put a pretty tree in that's got this beautiful foliage, which, by the way, they'll drop their leaves a little bit in certain times of year. They'll get yellow like this and drop off. That's normal. Yes. As tall as you let it get. It's a good question. She said, "How tall does it get?" Well, I would say a starfruit tree untethered would probably want to maybe get as big as this oak right here. But my tree, what I do is you let it grow up and you let it kind of begin to branch out, and then I topped it. I took the main header out. So now I can walk all the way underneath this tree. It's only maybe 15 feet tall, but it almost is like an umbrella. And then you just pick. So I would say if you let it go, probably 25 feet. But if you really kind of manage that top area, you could keep it at 10 to 12 feet and easily. And they don't mind that at all. They don't mind the pruning. In fact, they shear them where they grow them like that. So starfruit is a beautiful tree. He asked if we have to continuously top them. Yes, but not quite like other trees. Some are more vigorous. And so I would probably say maybe once a year if it continues. Do you once a year? Yeah. Again, if I can tell you anything, and I'll get into the pruning in a little bit, people need to manage their trees. Don't be afraid to take control of your trees and guide them. And we'll talk about that when we get to the pruning. So again, also when you plant tropical fruit trees, look at how pretty how different these two leaves are. Mangoes, with these long, gorgeous leaves here, a little bit more medium-sized leaves on the avocado, and then these pretty things. So I just love some of the foliage on these things. They're really pretty. And then the tamarind tree, love the tamarind. I don't know if anybody's had tamarind, but we can talk about that later. But so those are three of the common things that I really recommend that seem to do very well over the course of the past 30 years or so that I've been growing trees. Some of the lesser known, I want to give you three of those that are really interesting. One is the strawberry tree. Not to be confused with a strawberry tree that's grown up north. I forget the Latin name for that, but the one Latin name for this is Muntingia calbura, and that is right over here, this tree here. And this is a lot of fun. A lot of people don't know about this. They say children love these. I love these. But this is a beautiful tree. It's got little soft velvety leaves on it. And if you look right here, you see this fruit developing? That's actually, it'll turn a bright red, and it'll get about this big. It's 97 point something % sugar. Some people call it the cotton candy tree. It tastes like cotton candy. Kids love it. And it's good to put in your yard if you have a lot of squirrels or birds that try to get to your other fruit trees, because this is a distraction fruit. And this will come up with a single stalk if you allow it. I would probably cut this one here, and then as it gets bigger, probably eventually cut that. And no more than 10 feet, keep it at about that, and it drapes out again like a big umbrella, and it will have hundreds and hundreds of these little small strawberry fruit. I think they also call it a Jamaican cherry, but it's super sweet. They're wonderful. You can freeze them, put them in smoothies. Very sweet, high content. Now, these trees grow very fast. They grow about 10 feet a year, and so you want to cap those things off. And they're not very long-lived. They'll live about maybe 10 to 15 years. So that's something to consider. But it's a really great thing that a lot of people don't know about. It's one of my favorite small tropical trees, and you can keep it relatively small, but the strawberry tree is just a really wonderful fruit tree. So that's something that's a little less common, but it's one of my favorites. In fact, I might even take one of these home today. So, but that's a great tree. A little lesser known. And let me remember what it was, the other two. There's so many. The thing about growing fruit trees in Florida, our area, is there are just so many. Yes. Yes. I have two. That's a good question. She's wondering if this tree should be better in a little more shade because in full sun it didn't seem to do well. And I would always recommend with trees, no matter what it is, if it doesn't do well in one area, yank it out and move it, or grab another one and stick it somewhere else. Because, I mean, to answer your question, I don't know. I've seen them in full sun doing very well, but I've also seen them in full sun a little parched. So I'm a big proponent of experimenting on where you put things. If something's not doing well in a certain spot, like I had a Barbados cherry, that's another, I think that's a Barbados cherry there. And what I learned is it just wasn't growing properly. And that's one of the ones I like to talk about. And it's, in fact, the Barbados cherry, one of the cherries, as they get red, has the same vitamin C content as 12 oranges. It's where it's another term for that is acerola, acerola, and it's got a high vitamin C content. Great tree. But to get back to the point, I had it in an area by my house, real sandy soil, right? And it wasn't doing well. So I decided to dig it up and move it somewhere. And I looked at the roots, and they were full of nodes, root knot nematodes. So we have in Florida, in all these sandy soils and super sandy soils, while they may drain well, they're full of root knot nematodes. You can't really grow tomatoes well unless it's a certain variety. Figs are susceptible to root knot nematodes. So I took it and moved it to a little lower of an area that had more organic richness to the soil. It was a little wetter, and it's doing fantastic. So with any tree, like the strawberry tree, if it doesn't seem to be doing well, and it's still relatively small, you can always pick it up and move it. They're pretty resilient, and put it somewhere else. So, but I would say I would probably try to put it somewhere where there's a little less sun. But that's a great, fantastic tree. Sapodilla, one of my absolute favorites. You may have never heard of this. Sapodilla is a fruit tree that is, the tree is beautiful. I don't know that we have any sapodilla here, but the tree itself is gorgeous. Long, elongated leaves. It takes hurricane force winds. It takes drought. It takes flooding. It's the bulletproof tree. It's a beautiful, beautiful tree. And the fruit itself is about the size of an egg up to like a goose egg. And they're sort of oval. And when you cut it open, it's like a pear that you've soaked in brown sugar and cinnamon. It is an absolute dessert fruit. It is very sweet. My squirrels love them. Most to go to the squirrels. But sapodilla. And I'd say, I think it's probably on this little handout, a sapodilla, maybe under the less common there. Sapodilla, Sapodilla, yeah. And what I would say is there are many good varieties. Some are a little more round, some are a little more elongated. The Alano variety, Alano, if you can ever find that, is a wonderful variety. And it's a tree worth planting because of the beauty of the tree itself. You could, if you're in a homeowners association, you could pop it out front, they would think it's just a decorative tree. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, you got all this fruit. But sapodilla is a wonderful fruit tree, yes. Yes, the answer, she said, when did the fruit mature? Yes, all the time. They always seem to be, they're year-round. They really are. Sapodilla, and that's another good thing about sapodilla. There's no particular, like lychee or lychee, a 2-week window in the middle of June, and that's it. You're done. But sapodilla seem to always produce something. And for me, if I go and bag a couple up or put a little bottle on it to keep the squirrels off it, I can have them year-round, but they seem to love those. But so sapodilla is a good one to have constantly year-round, and it's a very sweet, delicious fruit. It's almost too sweet, but you can make sorbets out of it and all kinds of stuff. But the more important thing is that it's a tough tree. It can take the wind, it can take the cold, the rain. Pretty much, it can get down into the 20s and 30s and it'll be okay. So sapodilla is another great one if you've never heard of that before. What do I have? I had one more tree that was a little there's so many. Canistel. This is just something, even if you just write this down and just research it a little bit, just give you some homework to do. Let me describe the canistel fruit to you. It looks like a top that you would play with, like a toy top, and it's about this big, and it's literally shaped like a heart, like a top, and it turns yellow when it's ripe on the tree, and it's still hard, and you pick it, and you let it set on the counter like you would an avocado, right? And then when it gets a little soft, you can kind of just sort of just break it open with your hands. And it has the texture of a good cheesecake, and it tastes something between like a sweet potato and cheesecake and pumpkin pie. It's this creamy, delicious fruit that not many people know about. And so a canistel is something, if you've got property and you want to just, and you have some places to put things, and it's a beautiful tree. It's got gorgeous, it looks a lot like a loquat, sort of like this, but without the fluffy leaves. So canistel is a very unique fruit. Now, with some of these fruits, I'd always recommend people try them. Sometimes this time of year, you can do some mail order things from Miami, that area down there, Miami-Dade, Homestead, and you can go online and they'll send you a box of them, and I don't know what it costs, but to try, because you don't really see those in stores a lot. But I just want to throw that out there. It's one of my absolute favorite fruits of all. And I love all the ones. Jackfruit's phenomenal as well. We had a gorgeous giant jackfruit this year, and I was able to share it with friends, and it was one of the best tasting ones I've ever had. So canistel is a very unique and wonderful fruit. Now, just from looking up here, loquat, it's really more of a subtropical tree. It's not really tropical, but one thing you want to remember is that when and I always talk about freezes, but when they have the chance of freezing, which we do here in this area, you want to have some things in your yard that you don't have to worry about. And loquat is a really good option. It's a subtropical tree. It's evergreen. It produces some of the better ones produce a nice big fruit on them, and you don't have to worry about them freezing. Same with mulberry. It'll drop its leaves, but at least you know that it's not going to die if we get a hard freeze. And I have a little bit of trauma. You can probably tell some PTSD from freezing. There was a time back in 2010 and a couple other freezes we had in Vero where it wiped everything out. It got down into the 20s, and my yard is particularly, we had the Christmas lights all around the trees and the bags over them and trying to save things, which we did. But that's why I talk a lot about freezing. We have to understand that where we are in this subtropical zone, you want to make sure that you have some things that are not going to freeze, some things that if they do, we do get a hard weather, but we can protect them. So, and then over here, some very interesting one here, that with the for hanging fruit there is called an amberella or a hog plum or a June plum. It gets a nice big crunchy. It's not super sweet. It's a little bit tart, but that's a very unique variety. That's a beautiful tree. It's a gorgeous little tree, and you can keep that small. That's a neat one. This one here is the Barbados cherry, which I kind of talked about a little bit. Produces a little small cherries that are pretty tart, but they're high in vitamin C. They're very good for you. It's where they derive vitamin C from, actually, that tree there. Obviously, we got avocado, mango, several other things. Here's a canistel right here. It's a trompa. That's a good variety. And so jackfruit is another unique one. I'll just kind of hit on that real quick. Have anybody ever eaten jackfruit? A few people? Yeah. Some people have eaten it, and they actually think of it in the non-sweet form because they harvest it before it becomes too ripe, and they use it. Vegans use it as a substitute for pork. Like they'll make like a vegan pork out of it. Yeah. Did you really? Out of jackfruit? Well, how was it? You could put barbecue sauce on these leaves and it would taste pretty good. That's true. Yeah. But jackfruit, when you allow it to ripen, it tastes like juicy fruit gum. I mean, when you first start chewing juicy fruit gum, not when it goes away. It's fantastic, and it's got these. It's so hard to describe. It's the world's largest tree-borne fruit, and massive. Ours was about this big this year. I have pictures of it I can show you. And you process it. You have to use gloves or oil your hands because it's got latex in it. But it is amazing. We gave so much of it away. It's a phenomenon. We froze a bunch. It's a great fruit. So there are wonderful trees. Yes. Jackfruit? Yeah. Good question. So how many jackfruit does it produce? Because it's so big, it depends on the size of the tree. And so if your tree has a trunk on it about this big, you'll probably get 4 or 5 maybe that produce. The larger the tree gets, the more it will produce. And so it can't hold much because these are massive, massive fruit. And they're trunk bearing. They come right off the trunk. They're not out on the tips, So that's something interesting to know about jackfruit. Yes? That's an amberella or a June plum. Yeah. And now that is yeah, and and again that's a fruit that's not necessarily a super sweet fruit, but it's crunchy and maybe more like a not quite as sweet apple in a way. It's got a big seed in the center. I don't. It may be on here as on this document here. Let me see. It might be under uncommon. It's relatively hardy. It's relatively hardy. I would say that can probably, yeah, dwarf ambarella. Yeah, that could probably take down into the 30s and be okay. Yes, it depends. Yeah, it depends. Some are actually purple mambin, they call them as well, and some get purple. I don't know the variety, so it's hard for me to tell. I know that some June plum, they're meant to be eaten green. And then some are meant to be as where they just begin to get soft, and then they're the best they can be. So, is it the best tropical fruit? No, but if Armageddon comes, you'll want to have one, so you can just eat something, you know. So, but it's actually a beautiful tree, though. It's got a draping quality to it, drooping quality, which is very nice. So, now, which kind of brings me to pruning, and we can talk about other tropical fruits. You know, I'll stay later. I want you guys to know that when it comes to pruning, it's critical because I've seen pruning what it looks like over 20, 25 years. And so say we have a mango tree. Here's a mango tree. It's kind of a bad, what if we have a small, I don't think we have a smaller one, but typically with a mango tree, I typically buy them in either in the 5 gallon or 3 gallon or 7 gallon, which is probably going to be about this tall. And when you buy a tropical fruit tree, it may or may not have started to branch yet. Okay, but stick with me. I had a couple trees that I bought, and they were these kind of skinny tall, and they were about this tall. And had I not pruned it, it would have branched about up here, and then they would have kind of gone out another, and then branched maybe out here. So by the time this tree pruned was 10 feet tall, I would have really only had, probably count them on one hand, the amount of tips or ends of the branches, right? Okay, so for me, when I get a mango tree or really a tree for that most trees for that matter, if it hasn't started branching by about here in a pot, you know, and like that mango tree there is good. This has started branching here. And that's a pretty good height, which is about 18 inches off the ground. So now that we have 1, 2, 3, so you've got 3 or 4 trunks. But if it hasn't started doing that, I would just simply cut it. You put it in the ground for a month or two, and then just cut it. And what'll happen, depending on where the terminal node is, that's technical talk, but I can show you about that after more specifically. I would cut it. When you cut that, then you're going to start like 4 or 5 little shoots are going to come out from that. I select 3 or 4 of those, and those are going to be my literal structural branches at the base of the tree. And then when those come out, I'll say 4 or 5 of those come out, and if they haven't started branching by 18 inches or a foot, I'll cut it again. And then from that, you've got 3 or 4 more of those, right? And then when those get about this big, then if it hasn't branched, you cut it again, and then it'll send more out. So that by the time you get a tree that's 12 feet, you have an exponentially larger amount of tips on that tree, a dense tree. And where do the blooms come from on a mango tree? From the tips. And so you'll have 10 times as many blooms available on that tree as opposed to letting it just kind of get lanky and grow and have a couple of skinny branches going here and there. So pruning at the very beginning is very important. It's critical to master and direct that tree because the more tips you have, the more opportunities you have for fruit. And then you can selectively pull out inner branches and prune and so that there's airflow in that. But you want to maintain that from the beginning. Yes? Yes. I think so. With a fig tree, she asked if I'd do the same for a fig, and you want to do it when it's dormant in the wintertime. But with any tropical fruit tree, when you cut it, if I were to take this strawberry tree and I wanted it to go a certain direction, if it was really going too far this way, I could easily, and I wanted to keep it more dense, I could easily just chop it right here, and then it would be it would probably stay about this size. Or I would chop it. This is growing actually very nicely, though. I'd probably take this off. But with most tropical fruit trees, even subtropical like fig, you determine where it's going to go and where it's going to branch. And so it's really important to understand that. Avocado, the jackfruit as well. You get to a certain size, and if I wanted it to go this direction more, I would just take this out here, and that would knock some of the vigor out of the tree and just keep it a little bit smaller. So when it comes to pruning, I was into bonsai for a long time, or bonsai, and you have to learn when and where to cut, and you have to think about where it's going to go after that. And the art of pruning is very unique, and you can actually control which direction the tree goes and how big it will get. And if it's too heavy on one side, you can selectively go in and know which ones to hit to direct it in a different direction. And so you could do that with fig. I do it with all my trees, my starfruit trees, my avocados, anything I have in my yard, even my Barbados cherry. I will keep it and manage it where I want. And I don't mean just hack it with hedge trimmers. I mean take a good pair of pruners and go out and look at the tree and go, well, how do I want this to go? Do I want this branch to continue to go that way, or do I want more of an upright growth? Or do I not want more of an upright growth? I want to actually take and have it kind of flatten out right about here. And so you selectively prune and look at where each little thing is going to go out, and you can direct the growth of a tree. And so it's really critical, though. Now, a lot of people say, my tree is already, 22 feet. What do I do? That's a good question. You prune out no more than 20% of the tree foliage at one time. So if you have a tree that's out of hand and it's way up there, you can cut some of the larger branches back one every year and bring that tree literally back down and start over. So especially mango trees, they're tough. You can actually, well, I know that because I've had them freeze to about this level again. And then they completely put out new shoots, and those new shoots became the rest of the tree. So, but you never want to take away more than 20% of the canopy at one time. So just remember that rule of thumb. You can bring a tree back down. Yes? When do you say dormant? Yeah, well, some trees are dormant, that they lose their leaves and go dormant. She asked when to prune. I would always prune a tree, especially mangoes, after they've fruited. And if they haven't fruited after the time that they should have fruited, that's when I would prune. So if I had a mango that fruited heavily in the summertime, after the fruiting was done, that's when I would hack it all back and take it back. And in fact, I tip my mangoes all the time. Yes? No, good, and then they just fall on your head and the birds get them. Right, she asked about a papaya tree, which is it's not even a tree, it's actually in the herb family. How do you prune that? Because they'll get so high that it's useless. And this is another reason to manage your trees. You're just feeding the squirrels at that point and the birds. So papaya is unique. I've taken papaya and it's scary, but I've literally just cut it. Cut it somewhere along whatever height you want it to begin to branch, and it will regrow from the little sides, and it will grow out and possibly put out a couple different types of stems and branches. It almost reminds me of like a euphorbia or another tree like that, where but it's scary, but you can do it. You can cut a papaya down because freezes have taken them down, and then they shoot back up from the areas that were not killed. They've done that. Yeah, some trees are just tough. Like citrus, I've given up on citrus, I mean, so papayas do go hollow. They only have a certain lifespan. But papaya is a wonderful tree to grow. If you are looking for a tree that can produce both fruit and food, I like my papayas harvested early when they're green, and you take them and you peel them, and then you cut them into shavings. Like you can grate them and make an amazing papaya Thai salad. It's a spicy salad, and that's actually a food. Like we in America, we think of foods and fruits only when they're at their ripest. But in other cultures, they eat mango green as just a staple, as a starch. They eat papaya green as a food. And those are things to consider, because, especially with papaya, because they tend to want to get the worms but the best thing to do for that is stockings, pantyhose. When the fruit's small, put them on that, and the psyllid wasp that lays eggs can't do it. So that's something to consider. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So pineapples are a wonderful thing to grow. There's so many things, but let me not get off track. Pruning. So manage your trees, take care of them, and just know that it's okay to cut these trees. They will grow well. But the good question was when to do it, and it's typically after they are done fruiting. I wouldn't do it going into wintertime. I'd probably do it, probably. She says, is it too late now? I'd say yes, because if you cut a tree down back a bit, it's going to put out this new sensitive growth now, and if even if we get down into the upper 30s, it's going to kill all that. So I wouldn't do it now. I'd probably do it in the spring, or because you're going to have blooms now coming on in the wintertime. Mainly summer, though, for avocados and for mangoes, yes. Yes, anytime. Key lime, that's a good question. Citrus, speaking of citrus, I love citrus. I grew up on citrus. I always had citrus. But we have things that we're battling now that we just can't. That's why I moved to tropical fruits, with the greening and the canker. I know University of Florida is working on some rootstock varieties that are resistant, but I've not seen them yet in the stores. I don't know what's in the stores, but I did put in a finger lime. It's a weird citrus thing, and I did put a Persian lime in. I lost my key lime tree this year. Things happen, But citrus you can prune probably any time, I would say. Yeah. Yes. That's a good question. She asked if it's safer to put, a citrus or a Meyer lemon in a container. I would say if you can maintain that pot well and not let it get too dry, you have a more controlled environment. And in fact, with figs, because figs are so prone to root knot nematodes in our soils, they say either plant figs under patio stones, which mitigate the new root knot nematodes, or put them in a pot. So I'm a fan of condo mangoes. You can take an ice cream mango, which you have out here, that only get to be about 8 feet, and grow it in a pot, and it will fruit and bear in a pot. But you've got to be on it. You can't, I couldn't do it because I'm too lazy. But some people can really do that well. And a lot of these trees can be grown in pots, especially one of my favorites, which I didn't mention, jaboticaba or however you want to say it. It's a Brazilian tree that puts out big Concord grape-looking fruits on the trunk itself. It's trunk-bearing, and they're delicious. But they grow best in pots. I've had them in my yard, and they do terrible. But in pots, they do fantastic. I've got guys that are growing them in 50-gallon pots, and they're bearing, and they're doing great. So a lot of these tropical fruit trees can be grown in pots. And so that's a good question about that. So when it comes to protection, I want to hit on this a little bit because there's a YouTube video guy I watch. His name is Ryan Hall. It's Ryan Hall, y'all. And he, I hope I don't get monetized for that. But anyway, so he's talking about, it's a good weather channel. And he's talking about the pattern that we're in. We could see a couple of Arctic plunges and dips, which is, we haven't had one in a long time. If and when we do get cold weather, if we get it, it's worth the time and effort to take some incandescent lights if you have a smaller tree. If you have a tree that's you just put in the ground or you put it in 2 years ago and it's no bigger than this, it's worth the effort to take some, remember the old C9 Christmas bulbs, the bigger ones, the ones that are incandescent? Take an extension cord, put it out to the tree, wrap the tree up as best you can, and then throw some frost cloth on it and cover it up. And you'll save your tree if we do get a bad freeze. So I just want to commend you to do that because it's only a couple times a year that we might get cold weather. But when we do, there's two things to remember. You want to make sure you have a heat source, and that could be as simple as a little floodlight stuck at the base of the tree, but you have to encompass and enclose that heat. And so the best thing that I use, you could use blankets, you could use whatever you want, but frost cloth seems to do well enough that my wife would go out there with me and we'd take this big piece and kind of put it around maybe a 6 or 7 foot mango, have all my lights. In fact, what works well is those market lights, they call them, from Harbor Freight. They're the ones that you see in the restaurants, but not the LED ones, the incandescent. They put out enough heat, and then if you cover that up with some frost cloth and some clothespins, you'll save that tree. I've had temperatures in the 20s in my yard, and I've had little monitors. Trust me, it was this whole thing back in the early days, and a little temperature sensor, and there was at least a 5 to 7 degree difference within the little canopy I made and out of the canopy I made. Another thing to consider is watering well before the night of a really cold temperatures. That way the sun soaks into the soil and you get a heat that radiates up from that. There's a lot of things you can do to amend that. So I'm just kind of praying we don't have any cold weather. My trees are mostly big enough now where I don't have to worry about it, but I do have a couple mangoes I put in with the last, 2 or 3 years, and they're the good ones. They're like the lemon zest and the orange sherbet, and I do not want to lose those, so I would certainly try to protect them. And that's another reason to keep your trees smaller, because it allows you, if we get a hard freeze, to actually go and be able to throw some cloth over that. Take a couple people and do it, and it seems like a lot of labor, but it's well worth it. And so with that, I want to kind of bring it to a close. I would say there's a couple of things I didn't mention. Please grow pineapples. They're so easy to grow. Go to the store, get a pineapple, wring it like a lobster, and if you're not from Florida, the Florida lobsters, you take the head and the tail and you wring them. That's how you do it. You take the pineapple, you put a cloth here and you take it. Don't cut the pineapple top off. Wring it. Just turn it. And you'll get a nice little nub there that doesn't have a lot of flesh on it. Peel some of those pieces off, the little leaves. Set it on the counter for a week. Let it dry out a little bit. And then either stick it right in the ground or stick it in a pot. And then use it as decoration. They're beautiful. It's a bromeliad. You pay all this money for these gorgeous bromeliads. Pineapples are bromeliads. They make a beautiful landscape addition. They love to be high and dry. They don't want to be wet. And then you'll produce pineapples. It may take a couple years, so what? But and then once they get going, they really get going. So there's a lot of things you can do. A lot of people put hedges in their yards. And if you're in an HOA, you can sneakily get by putting some, instead of putting in a hedge of, viburnum, you could put in grumachama. Grumachama, it's a crazy long word, but grumachama is a wonderful, delicious fruit that grows very well here. You can hedge it, and it's a fantastic eating fruit, and your HOA will never know. So there's a lot of things you can do. I'm going to stay and answer any more questions. I'd love to talk to you guys, but thank you for coming. It's wonderful. Get some stuff, get some grow. The best time to plant a tree is 10 years ago. Second best time is today. So enjoy that. Thanks for coming, guys. I appreciate it.